The Indianapolis Colts offensive line could undergo some major changes this offseason. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Hicks, your resident film nerd over at HorseshoeHuddle.com, and my partner Jake Arthur is our credential Crocs for the site. He's not here today, but don't worry, we still have a very fun show for you guys planned. You know, all off season we've been talking about the big needs at tight end and corner and safety and also linebacker for the Colts this offseason. So today we're going to focus on some of those lesser needs or maybe some hidden needs that we don't really talk about too much. We're going to start with the offensive line. Obviously, we've got the defensive line queued up for today and also backup quarterback / quarterback competition in camp. We're going to talk about that a little bit as well. But first, let's kick it off with this offensive line. And I do think to a degree we are kind of ignoring how big a need the Colts have at offensive line this offseason. And maybe it's because there are some in-house options and some good in-house options to replace the potential departures. But we're looking at this veteran offensive line that has been together since 2022, since the second half of 2022, and we are potentially going to see some major changes this offseason to that veteran group. So obviously Will Fries and Ryan Kelly are both free agents. We don't know if either one of them will be back or what the case is going to be with them. Braden Smith, his future is up in the air with the team. We have no clue. Again, he left the team late in the season with a personal matter, and we haven't really been enlightened into what that is at this point. So we really have no clue as a fan base or even as reporters right now, talking about, will he be back? Will he be gone? Like what's really up in the air with him? So those are three guys that have started for years, Kelly and Smith. I mean, Kelly's been a starter since 2016 was when he was drafted. Braden Smith has essentially been a starter since his rookie season in 2018. Fries has obviously been a starter since 2022. So all three of those guys, their future is up in the air with the Colts. Now, if I had to speculate here, I would say Will Fries should be back for the Colts. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever for the Colts to let him leave in free agency. Only a 26-year-old offensive guard who every single year has gotten better for the Colts and was playing at, maybe all pro level is a bit hyperbolic to say early in the season, but certainly was playing at a Pro Bowl level to start the year. It's not just my eyes saying that either. Pro Football Focus, I believe he still finished as like the second or third highest graded guard in football this year through those 6 starts he had. So Will Fries, fantastic player, was really ascending every single year. And if the Colts let him walk, it would be one of the dumber decisions of the Chris Ballard tenure. There are a couple quarterback decisions that probably beat that there, but it would be one of the worst decisions he has ever made. So Will Fries, I assume the Colts will be bringing him back. If you can get him on a 1 to 2, maybe 3-year deal, anywhere in that like $8 to $12 million per year range, perfectly fine for a very good starting guard. And I expect him to be the Colts starter next year at right guard. So that's one of those 3 vacancies potentially locked up if the Colts are able to bring back Fries and get him on a good deal. But Ryan Kelly and Braden Smith, I think it's more bleak when talking about their potential to come back next season. Ryan Kelly, we've had the report by Mike Chappell, who he said he was speaking with Chappell, or Chappell said he was speaking with Kelly recently, and how Kelly's excited to test free agency. Like, yes, he does want to come back to the Colts, but as Chappell said in that report, the Colts seem set to go younger at that position. We'll talk about that younger player that they're set to go towards. But yeah, Ryan Kelly, it does look like his long tenure with the Colts will be up after 9 seasons with the team. I do doubt that he'll be back next season. The Colts just have other options, and Kelly, the best ability in the NFL is availability, and he just hasn't been available for the Colts. Plus, he's over 30 years old, it certainly is time to move on there. And then for Braden Smith, I think this is a tougher decision if it weren't for the cap hit. With Smith's cap hit, I mean, the Colts can save nearly $20 million next season with releasing him while eating very, very minimal dead cap. It does kind of make sense to move on from Smith right now, especially when you consider, again, the best ability in the NFL is availability. He has not been available for the Colts the last 2 seasons. It's probably time to move on there too. So you're moving on from, Ryan Kelly is a former All-Pro back in 2022 or 2021, I believe. Braden Smith has never really been an All-Pro, but he's been a fringe Pro Bowler for most of his career. These are 2 established starters on the offensive line, and moving on from them, again, puts that offensive line that we've seen these last few years really in flux. And it goes from these guys who have been like rotational backups or promising young players have to step in as starters. And sometimes it doesn't always work out. We saw back in 2022, the Colts had 2 guys stepping up into starting roles in Danny Pinter and Matt Pryor. And obviously that didn't work out for the team. So we are looking at Tanner Bortolini and Matt Gonsalves as the next guys up at those positions. Gonsalves, a 3rd-round rookie this past season. Bortolini, a 4th-round rookie. Both of them had really promising debut seasons for the Colts. But is that enough to have full confidence that these guys can be long-term starters for the team? I'm not too sure. You look at Bortolini. I think the pass blocking was really good from him last year. I think his eyes in the pass game are fantastic. I think he's a great help blocker on the interior. Needs to get stronger, needs to get better in the run game, but I think there is something there to develop and work with. For Matt Gonsalves, it's actually kind of the complete opposite. I think that the run game is fantastic with him. I think he's a big asset in the run game, but it does, the pass blocking needs some work, and he needs to just improve his technique. Again, get a little bit stronger as well and get a little bit more fluid in there. I think they're both very, very good, interesting prospects for the Colts. Am I here to stamp saying that these guys are the long-term options at right tackle and center? I think it's a bit too early for that. And like I said, we had guys that were promising in 2022, and the Colts had to quickly pivot, or not quickly. They should have quickly pivoted. They didn't, but they did have to pivot to Will Fries and Bernhard Raimann later in the season. And luckily, those 2 options worked out much better than Pryor and Pinter. So I think Bortolini and Gonsalves have earned the right to get the first crack at those jobs this offseason if Kelly and Smith ultimately are not part of the team. But I do think the Colts need to keep adding, whether that's in free agency, whether that's in the draft. I think they just need to keep adding to this room just to make sure they don't get stuck in a situation where, you're putting all the eggs in the Tanner Bortolini basket or all the eggs in the Matt Gonsalves basket. And then if they don't work out, you got to have somebody who can step in like the Colts did in 2022. Imagine, for how awful the 2022 season was, imagine how terrible it would have been if Fries and Raimann weren't at least upgrades on that offensive line. I know they lost all those games regardless, but it could have been even uglier for this team in the second half of the season. So I do think they need to keep adding to that group. I think, more draft picks wouldn't hurt. Like on day 3, if the Colts move back a couple times on day 3, you can just keep adding more players into that mix. So I like Chase Lunt, for instance, from UConn, Clay Webb from Jacksonville State, Tate Ratledge from Georgia, Drew Kendall from Boston College if you're looking for a backup center. I think these are interesting guys on day 3 that can just step in and be quality backups and then continue to develop the other guys behind these guys right now. They still have Dalton Tucker. They still have Blake Freeland. Neither one of them has been great in their NFL stint so far, but there is enough to develop with those players. So as long as the Colts keep adding and they give Bortolini and Gonsalves the grace they need, and hopefully those guys take that next step this offseason, the offensive line should be fine. But again, this is something to keep in mind going to next season, where we can sit here and say it should be fine and we can not worry about it too much. But again, this is a big change going from Ryan Kelly and Braden Smith to Tanner Bortolini, Matt Gonsalves. Again, it's not a lock to work out, even if, we have our sights set on linebacker and safety and tight end as these bigger needs for the Colts. This could be a surprising need. So if the Colts are not smart and they don't add to this group, this could really blow up in their face going young at this position. But if they do, again, if they are just proactive about this and they say, hey, we're going to give Bortolini and Gonsalves the first crack at it, but we're going to bring in a 4th-round pick guy as well. We're also going to sign a veteran center to back up Bortolini. then you can be protected from any kind of mistakes that happen there, and you can still let these kids grow as starters. So I'm not I'm not crazy worried about these two as starters. I do think there is, some worry, obviously, anytime you go from Pro Bowl talents that are in their 30s or near 30s to these young, unproven guys. There is some worry there, but I do have optimism for both Bordelini and Gonsalves, and I think they can step in and be some good players. But ultimately, again, the biggest thing is re-sign Will Fries. Do not let Will Fries go, because if they let Will Fries go, then we get into maybe you take a guard in round one territory, because then you're making some mistakes there. So let's not get there. Let's re-sign Will Fries. Let's roll with Bordelini and Gonsalves, get some additional talent behind them, and let's roll from there. But offensive line, maybe not a massive need for the Colts this offseason, but it's certainly something to keep in the back of your mind as the Colts, do their offseason process this year. But coming up, guys, we are going to talk about the defensive line. Now, again, we're all talking all trenches today. We just saw that Super Bowl with the Philadelphia Eagles dominating in the trenches on both sides. So obviously, this is why we're talking about the trenches today. This defensive line is another positional group kind of in flux that could see a lot of changes, and the Colts have an opportunity to add a little bit more to that room. But first, football season may be over, but basketball is in full swing, and there's no better way to stay in the game than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With PrizePicks, you can pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks is quick and easy. You can set up your lineup in less than 60 seconds, and their fast and secure withdrawals mean that I can get my winnings in as little as 15 minutes. Plus, I love their weekly promos like Taco Tuesday, where you get like discounted player projections for even better value. It's just great value. It's a fun time. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. All right, Locked On Everydayers, we are back talking all about the Colts defensive line. Again, this is not one of the position groups that we're really harping on this offseason because we have bigger fish to fry with safety and corner and tight end. But defensive line, again, this is kind of a little bit in flux. There are 4 players that are pretty much a lock to be back next season, and that is Kwity Paye, Laiatu Latu, DeForest Buckner, and Grover Stewart. Grove and Buck are awesome as long as they can stay healthy and on the field. Very, very good players for the Colts at defensive tackle. Kwity Paye, it kind of is what he is. He's not a good pass rusher, but he's a good run defender, and he finishes plays in the backfield, which is more than we can say about most players on this team. So he led the team in sacks last season, despite being probably one of their least efficient pass rushers, because he's able to finish those plays and is athletic enough to chase down quarterbacks. That's good enough in my book to be a sub-starter or kind of a starter for a team in the NFL. And then Laiatu Latu, the inverse of Kwity Paye, where he can get off blocks, he can win his pass rush reps, but can he finish plays? Is he strong enough to be a consistent pass rusher? Those are the questions that he needs to answer going into next season. But those 4 guys will be back next season. There's really no question whatsoever about those guys there. But everyone else who had significant snaps on the defensive line, their status is kind of up in the air. I mean, Tyquan Lewis is a cut candidate, I think, with how he played last year. Samson Ebukam did not play last year because of torn Achilles, but with the cap hit remaining on his contract and being an older player coming off an Achilles injury, it could make sense to, move on and use that cap space elsewhere this offseason. And then Raekwon Davis as well. I think that should be an easy cut candidate for the Colts. Get out of that contract and just get a new defensive tackle in here. And then Dio Dangbo and Taven Bryan are both free agents. Do you bring back Dio Dangbo after a rookie contract where the flashes were so good? The flashes were fantastic, but they came in spurts. They were never really consistent. Do you bring him back for Lou Anarumo and just say, hey, here's this still ball of clay? He's only like 24, 25 years old, still a ball of clay. And you say, just make this one work still, or do you just kind of reset at that there? And then Taven Bryan obviously won't be back, but Taven Bryan's another one there. Your other 2 guys are Isaiah Land and Adetomi Adebore, but those guys have barely shown anything thus far in their NFL careers. They barely played on defense. How much stock do you really put in those guys? Not really a ton. So really, when you're looking at this defensive line group that going into this past offseason or going into this last season, we were all saying is the strength of the team, going to carry the team as far as they can go this last year. But injuries and inconsistencies really hurt that group up front. And it could be time for just at least a minor reset up there. There are some veteran free agents that could make some sense. You have guys like a Khalil Mack hitting the market. You have DeMarcus Lawrence potentially hitting the market. So they could go that route. I mean, Hassan Reddick is going to hit the market. I don't know how much you want to, really invest in Hassan Reddick after the year he just had. But again, these are guys that have produced in the past. You can bring in one of those veteran guys there maybe to be just a designated pass rusher on third downs when you get Kwity Paye off the field. And you can have, that impact there. But I also think there's a rare opportunity in this draft class. And I know after Latu did not have a massive rookie season, people would probably not be too big on taking another edge rusher in the first or second round. But when you look at the strength of this draft, it's on the defensive line. I mean, you're looking just in the Colts pick range in round 1-ish, round 1 or late round 1. You got James Pierce at edge, out of Tennessee. You got Mike Green, who people love. You got Mykal Walker from Georgia, who those two Georgia players are such hybrid players that could play, edge or off ball and really be unique weapons on your defense for a guy like Lou Anarumo. So do any of those guys impress you enough to where you say, you know what, we're going to keep adding on the defensive line? Maybe we don't want Chris Ballard to keep taking edge rushers, but it could be the best pick for the Colts there. But the other option, and this is the option that I think is more intriguing for the Colts, is the defensive tackle depth in this class is really, really good. And when you have guys like Buckner and Grover who are in their 30s, who they're fantastic players, but they're not guys who are going to play 70 to 80% of the snaps anymore. You need to have rotational guys who can play. We've seen what happened with the Colts the last couple of years when they have not had rotational players behind those two. Every time they come off the field, the Taven Bryans, the Raekwon Davises, Adetomiwa was in there as well. Those guys are getting blown off the ball, and the Colts defense is getting hurt by that. So when you have a draft class like this, are you looking at all the talent and saying, maybe we got to take a defensive tackle? I'm not saying maybe in round 1, but round 2, round 3. I do think that is in play for the Colts in this draft. So, Derek Harmon out of Oregon, Kenneth Grant from Michigan, Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, Tyleik Williams from Ohio State, Darius Alexander from Toledo. This is just a few of the guys here. You got the dude from Kentucky as well. I didn't even have him listed here. There's so many players in this draft that make sense for the Colts as their third defensive tackle. And again, if you're going to be playing more two-gapping stuff, you're going to need your defensive tackles to be bigger bodies that can eat some blocks and help these linebackers be free. I do think it makes sense to invest in defensive tackle. But again, this all comes down to what the Colts do with those other massive need positions. If they come out of free agency without a safety, without an outside corner, without a tight end, then I don't know if you can really afford the luxury of a defensive tackle in the top 50. But if they come out of free agency with a starting caliber outside corner, with a starting caliber safety, and maybe at least something at tight end, then I think you can talk yourself more into hey, maybe a defensive tackle in round 1 or round 2 or round 3 to really shore up this defense and provide a good rotational player. I'm not saying it's their biggest need. That's the point of today's episode, is we're not talking about the biggest needs here for the Colts, but I think defensive tackle and defensive end as well, I think, are pretty big needs. Defensive end, I think I would more so go the free agency route, but defensive tackle, the Colts have a very rare opportunity with how loaded this is at defensive tackle this draft is. And if you can get in a guy who can play a little bit behind Buckner and Grover, I think you got to take advantage of that for the Colts. I think Darius Alexander from Toledo, for instance, would be a fantastic third defensive tackle behind those guys. Or maybe, maybe teams are just not sold on a Walter Nolan. He slips to your second round pick. Just take that all day. Take that money right there and that free money right there and just make it work for your defense. But I do think the Colts have an opportunity to upgrade their defensive line a good bit this offseason, especially considering how porous it was last year, especially compared to expectations. Expectations were very high for this defensive line. They got to add some more pieces here to make it, meet the expectations that were set last year and kind of reset that group up front. So again, offensive line, defensive line, where championships are built, the Colts have both of those groups kind of in flux this offseason, and they're kind of minor needs because we have so many other needs on this team. Just goes to show how far away the Colts are, I guess, from a team like the Philadelphia Eagles. But coming up, we're going to talk about the quarterback position. And no, we're not going to talk about like replacing Anthony Richardson per se. We're mostly going to talk about just kind of the Colts' options at adding to that quarterback room this offseason and how they should go about adding to that quarterback room. Should it be free agency? Should it be the draft? What really makes the most sense for the Colts this offseason? But first, when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to get in on some fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it helps keep every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Locked On Colts everydayers. We're here talking about the quarterback position for the Colts. And, normally I wouldn't put the quarterback position at the end of an episode, but I do think the topic that we're talking about for today's show is not as scathing or as hot takey to go at the beginning of a show. So obviously it's a make or break season for Anthony Richardson. We have talked about this at length on this show. You guys know the conversation at this point, the pros and cons to Anthony Richardson. So I'm not going to go through them here. Obviously, we have a whole offseason of still talking and speculating about Richardson. So it's not really for today's conversation. But the next part of that conversation really is, what do the Colts do at the quarterback position aside from Richardson? Joe Flacco was here last year, and he wasn't really a mentor type. He was more so just a backup quarterback that could play if anything happened. Got in there a little bit too much this year, which seems to be a trend with, your Anthony Richardsons. Yeah, the backup quarterback in Indy is probably going to play a good bit next season, knowing what we know about Anthony Richardson. So really, where do the Colts want to go in terms of addressing that other quarterback position? Do they want to go on the high end and go, swing for a Justin Fields or swing for a Sam Darnold? Those two guys are big money guys. I mean, they're probably going to get big money on the open market, and you kind of expect to start them if you go and sign them. So do the Colts just say, you know what, this Richardson thing didn't work, let's go get a Fields to go win a little bit more this season, and maybe Richardson can develop as a backup for an entire year? Or maybe you do the same thing with like a Sam Darnold. So that's one option they could go. I don't think they go that route. I think Fields will be out of their price range. Like in a perfect world, Fields would be a fantastic player to bring in, but he's going to cost upwards of $20 million per year, I think, on the open market. It just doesn't make sense for the Colts with all the needs they have on their roster to use that amount of money on a guy who might not even start, or even if he does start, he's still like a low-end QB1. It doesn't really make sense to go that route. But then you have like the middle end of the spectrum with like your Jameis Winstons, your former first-round picks like your Mac Jones or your Zach Wilson, or your veteran that can win some games like an Andy Dalton. Like they could go that route with it, where you're paying like maybe like $10 million a year, $9 million a year to get a guy who could maybe compete in camp. And if you're being really honest with yourself, can maybe beat out Richardson in training camp. So that seems a little bit more likely. But again, it's a lot of cap space for a team that has a lot of needs on not very good quarterbacks. I mean, I know everyone loves the idea of a Jameis Winston, but the actuality of a Jameis on the field is not very good. Same goes with like a Mac Jones or a Zach Wilson or even an Andy Dalton. Like, these guys aren't really going to win that many games for you, so it's kind of tough to say. But then you have like the low-end options, the guys who won't cost that much, who aren't very good quarterbacks either, but Heck, every quarterback we've mentioned so far isn't very good. And that's like your Jimmy Garoppolos, your Jacoby Brissett's, like those like very low end backup quarterbacks. Again, that's another option the Colts could go here. I don't think it really moves the needle too much, but they have to bring in somebody, and these are kind of the options that are out there. It's not great. It's not perfect. But those are your free agency options, and it does make the most sense to go the free agency route, I guess, for the Colts, just because you want a guy who's been there, done that a little bit. But I would argue that I don't even think there's that many options this year that are as good as like a Joe Flacco option was last offseason. And Joe Flacco wasn't particularly good or enticing last offseason either. So, yeah, it's slim pickings when it comes to free agent quarterbacks. So maybe the Colts go the draft route. And to just put my opinion on the draft, I don't think it's a very good draft year for quarterbacks. I do think there are some intriguing mid-round options, but one thing that we do need to keep in mind, I think, when it comes to mid-round quarterbacks is outside of a couple of guys who break the mold a little bit, like you go back to like Colin Kaepernick was a second-round pick, Andy Dalton was a second-round pick who was a pretty good starting quarterback. Jalen Hurts just won the Super Bowl, second-round pick, but like outside of that, like the mid-round quarterback thing doesn't typically work out in any meaningful way. Like it's even hard to turn those guys into decent backups. So when I mentioned guys like Will Howard, Jalen Milroe, Riley Leonard, Dylan Gabriel, like, yes, those are feasible guys who are going to go in like round 2, 3, 4, whatever it's going to be. Do those guys really move the needle for the Colts? I'm not too sure if they do either. I mean, you look at a guy like Milroe, you're going to have kind of all the same issues that you had with Anthony Richardson. The accuracy is just very bad, great athlete, but you have to work on him quite a bit. You look at guys like Will Howard and Riley Leonard, and they were in college forever, and they didn't really reach many high. I mean, I know Howard just won the title and Leonard just lost to him in the title game, but when we look at why those teams were there in the title, it really wasn't on the back of like a superstar season by Will Howard or Riley Leonard. It was kind of those guys in a way holding back those teams. I think Howard's obviously the better quarterback here, but I don't think either one of them are truly enticing for me. Dylan Gabriel is kind of like, you know, your little check down backup quarterback. I think he's got a decent arm, not a big arm by any means, but again, these guys, if you're going to be a mid-round pick as a quarterback in a QB starved league, you're probably not great enough to start. I mean, I know that doesn't apply to everyone. Brock Purdy was a 7th round pick. Jalen Hurts, obviously a second round pick. But in this type of QB class, it's kind of hard to justify for me. So yeah, guys, it is a crazy, crazy group of quarterbacks for the Colts to look to add this offseason. I'm not really seeing too many enticing options there. Again, maybe a Mac Jones is probably the best because it is like a former first-round pick who can probably operate the offense a little bit coming off the bench. But outside of that, I'm not sure the Colts are going to get that QB competition or that guy who could push Richardson as a starter that a lot of people kind of want this offseason. I don't think there's just many options out there. I think you can maybe tell everybody that like a Mac Jones or a Jameis Winston will push Richardson, but realistically, I mean, even if they were to be the start over Richardson, like we're talking high-end backup caliber of play. Like it's not great here. So yeah, QB options this offseason are slim pickings. We'll see what the Colts ultimately do there. Do they go back to a veteran that's played with Steichen in the past like they've done the last 2 years? Do they go to an interesting mid-level backup, a low-end backup? Or do they go to the draft and they say, hey, we'll take a guy in round 3, round 4, and Richardson, if it doesn't work, we'll turn to one of these guys. So we'll see. There's a lot of options, not good options, but there are options out there for backup quarterback, and we'll see what the Colts ultimately decide to do there. But that is all I have for today. Again, these are like 3 underrated needs, I guess, for the Colts this offseason. Offensive line is in flux, defensive line is in flux, and they got to add to that quarterback room. You guys let me know in the comment section below what would you do at each of these spots this offseason? Like, how would you address the offensive line? What would you add to the defensive line? And what would you ultimately do at quarterback behind Anthony Richardson? Let me know in the comment section below. And I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Colts your first listen today and every day. Next, go find Locked On NFL. First, the madman Tyler Rowland kicks off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso. and then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you guys want to become a Locked On Colts insider and chat with us directly and get that insider scoop, follow the link in our show notes. And if you guys don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2, all on Twitter. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We love your guys' ratings, reviews, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow afternoon.